Hello guys, happy Monday, May 11th. I am so happy you are watching today's online lecture. It's a bit different. I spent the past 20 minutes in my room reorganizing it so I could stand and teach like I usually do and just get the energy flowing. So today, last week, we left off with the assignments of the origin of the Cold War assignment. And that deadline got pushed back to today at 11:59, guys, because we made the abrupt decision not to hold an online lecture on last Friday. So you're still working on that assignment, and your warm-up and wrap-up questions for Monday will also be due today at 11:59. But you should already be halfway through your origins of the Cold War assignment. So today we are going to look at post-war cooperation and the UN, satellite states in Eastern Europe, occupational zones in Germany, and the Iron Curtain. So let's talk about the post-war cooperation and the UN. The founding of the United Nations in the fall of 1945 provided one hopeful sign for the future. The General Assembly of the United Nations was created to provide representation to all member nations, while the 15-member Security Council was given the primary responsibility within the UN for maintaining international security and authorizing peacekeeping missions. So this is the general goal of the United Nations, to provide international security and enforcing peacekeeping missions. So the five allies of wartime, the US, Great Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union, were granted permanent seats and veto power in the UN Security Council. Optimists hoped that these nations would be able to reach agreements on international issues. In addition, the Soviets went along with a US proposal to establish an Atomic Energy Commission in the United Nations. They rejected, however, a plan proposed by Bernard Baruch for regulating nuclear energy and eliminating atomic weapons. Rejection of the Baruch plan was interrupted by some American leaders as proof that Moscow did not have peaceful intentions. So this is why so many people think Russia is not this peacekeeping country that it's alleged to be, because of the first interactions with the United Nations. So the United Nations is an international government of sorts. It has almost all countries. So the United Nations So it has almost all countries it's a peacekeeping organization so the first goal of this United Nations, the first proposal of this United Nations was in a way to reduce nuclear energy as it relates to wars. Because remember, World War II just happened. The United Nations was a direct effect from that war, and atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. So this was a really big concern of these wars taking place in Japan. That, yes, we know we'll have other wars, but we also have nukes that could severely cripple us. It is ultimate destruction with the nukes. The United Nations also offered the Soviets participation in the new International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, aka World Bank, created at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. The bank's initial purpose was to fund rebuilding of a war-torn world. The Soviets, however, declined to participate because they viewed the bank as an instrument of capitalism. The Soviets did join the other allies in the 1945 to 1946 Nuremberg trials of 22 top Nazi leaders for war crimes and violation of human rights. So we extended some courtesy to the Soviet Union, even after all this downplay and hatred towards us breaking up as allies after World War II. They declined because they feared this all-reaching capitalistic nature. So that's alright. But they did participate in the Nuremberg trials. And if you guys aren't familiar with those trials, it is basically a top Nazi brass going to court, going to trial at an international court for war crimes and violations of human rights. They tried several Nazis, from top brass to normal soldiers. So let's talk about these satellite states in Eastern Europe. Distrust turned into hostility beginning in 1946 as Soviet forces remained in occupations of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Elections were held by the Soviets as promised by Stalin at Yalta, but the results were manipulated in favor of communist candidates. One by one from 1946 to 1948, communist dictators, most of them loyal to Moscow, came to power in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Hungary, and I don't know how to pronounce that country's name, but several of these countries. Apologists for the Soviets argued that Russia needed buffer states or satellites, nations under the control of a great power, as a protection against another Hitler-like invasion from the West. So these Soviet states, these satellite countries, were in this area even though they were forced out during World War II. They were still trying to creep in. They were trying to creep in by the excuse of satellite states. This is saying they were trying to keep an eye out in Eastern and Central Europe. The US and British governments were alarmed by the Soviet takeover of Eastern Europe. They regarded Soviet actions in this region as a flagrant violation of self-determination, genuine democracy, and open markets. The British especially wanted free elections in Poland, whose independence has been the issue that started World War II. So Europe has alternative goals of having free elections in Poland. And these satellite sites from the Soviet Union was disrupting that process for them. So, these satellite sites, that's one. The second thing we are going to talk about is occupational zones. In Germany. At the end of the war, the division of Germany and Austria into Soviet, French, British, and US zones of occupation was meant to be only temporary. So our presence in Germany was only meant to be this temporary fix to this problem after the war. In Germany, however, the eastern zone under Soviet occupation genuinely evolved into a new communist state, the German Democratic Republic. The conflict over Germany was, at least in part, a conflict over differing views of national security and economic needs. The Soviet wanted a weak Germany for security reasons and large war reparations for economic reasons. The United States and Great Britain refused to allow reparations from the Western zones because both viewed the economic recovery of Germany as important to the stability of Central Europe. The Soviets, fearing a restored Germany, tightened their control over East Germany. Also, since Berlin lay within the zone, they attempted to force the Americans, British, and French to give up their assigned sectors to the city. So the Soviets were losing hope at once again trying to occupy Germany for their own political and economic reasons. So they tried every effort in their playbook to force the rest of the Allies to what? To give up. I'm calling it quits, going home. So that was the Soviets' strategy in dealing with this conflict. So the Iron Curtain. I'm tired of babying the Soviets, Truman told Secretary of State James Burns in January 1946. News of a Canadian spy stealing atomic secrets for the Soviets and continued Soviet occupation of northern Iran further encouraged a get tough policy in Washington. So the US was getting tough on the Soviets. This get tough policy to like get tough policy to combat both of these things. Because we can't let the Soviets win. Because, like I said in earlier lectures, it's a battle between these two ideas, the communist and communist socialist, the communist political system, socialist economic system versus the democratic political system and the capitalism economic system. So two battling ideologies, the United States versus Soviet Unions. In March 1946, in Fulton, Missouri, Truman was present on the speaker's platform as former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill declared, "An iron curtain has descended across the continent of Europe." The Iron Curtain metaphor was later used throughout the Cold War to refer to the Soviet satellite states of Eastern Europe. Churchill's Iron Curtain speech called for the partnership between Western democracies to halt the expansion of communism. Did the speech anticipate the Cold War or help to cause it? Historians still debate on this issue. So, the Cold War is upon us. There's no way of denying it. The Iron Curtain speech to some historians was a warning to anticipate the Cold War between the US and Soviet Unions. In the next few lectures, we are going to talk about the containment strategy in Europe. So, I hope you fill out your Origins of the Cold War assignment and your warm-up and wrap-up questions for today and submit them to me in a Google Doc to tsbdnola@gmail.com. If you need a deadline extension, as always, please feel free to reach out to me. Same email address. See you tomorrow with a new lecture video.